Hello everyone, and welcome back to English with Justin. I'm your host Justin, and you're tuning in to episode number 5. Today, we're going to dive into one of my favorite topics, traveling. We'll talk about how to communicate effectively in English when you're on the go, whether you're booking a hotel, navigating an airport, or just asking for directions. But that's not all. We have a special guest with us today, my friend David, who absolutely loves traveling. David's been to so many countries, and he's here to share his experiences and teach us some key English phrases that will help you when you're exploring the world. So if you're planning your next trip or just want to brush up on your travel English, you won't want to miss this one. Let's get started. David, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Justin. I'm excited to be here and talk about one of my favorite things, traveling.
You've traveled a lot, right? Can you tell our listeners a bit about some of the places you visited?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to travel to quite a few places. Europe, Asia, South America, you name it. One of the things I've learned is how important it is to know some key English phrases, especially in countries where English might not be the first language.
That's so true. Even if English isn't the main language in a country, it's still widely spoken around the world. So, let's talk about some of the useful phrases or expressions our listeners can use when traveling. What's one of the first phrases that comes to mind?
I'd say one of the first things you need to know is how to ask for directions. Whether you're at the airport, a train station, or just walking around, you'll probably need to ask something like, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to?" For example, "Can you tell me how to get to the hotel?" or "Where is the nearest bus station?" It's simple, polite, and direct.
That's a great one. And what about at hotels or when booking accommodations?
Yes, when you're at a hotel, you'll often need to ask questions like, "Do you have a reservation?" or "Can I check in, please?" If you need something specific, like a towel or directions, you can ask, "Can I have an extra towel?" or "Could you tell me the best way to get to the city center?"
And what if you're in a restaurant? What are some good phrases to know?
In restaurants, it's useful to know how to order food and drinks politely. You can say, "I'd like to order, please," or "Can I get the check, please?" Also, if you need help with the menu, asking, "What do you recommend?" can be really helpful.
That's perfect. And for our listeners who might be nervous about traveling, do you have any advice for communicating confidently in English while abroad?
Absolutely. My biggest advice is to stay calm and don't be afraid to make mistakes. People are usually friendly and willing to help, especially when they see you're making an effort. Use phrases like "excuse me" or "could you help me," as they show politeness and make people more likely to assist you.
That's so true. And even if your English isn't perfect, just trying will go a long way. Before we wrap up, do you have a favorite travel memory where speaking English helped you out?
Oh, definitely. I remember being in Japan, and I got completely lost trying to find my hotel. I asked a local in English, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" and they didn't, but they still helped me by showing me the way. It was a great example of how even a little English can make a big difference.
Now, let's dive a little deeper into some more specific situations where knowing the right English phrases can really make a difference while traveling. David, one thing that comes up a lot for travelers is dealing with transportation. How do you handle asking for help when you're trying to get around in a new city?
That's a great point. Public transportation can be tricky in a new place. One of the most useful phrases when you're at a train station or bus stop is, "Which train or bus goes to?" For example, "Which bus goes to the city center?" or "How long does it take to get to?" This way, you're showing you need help with directions and time, and it's a very polite way to ask.
And what about when you're buying tickets? I know that can be stressful for travelers, especially if they're not sure how the system works.
Exactly. If you're buying a ticket, some key phrases are, "Can I buy a ticket to, please?" or "How much is a one-way or return ticket?" And if you're unsure about which option to choose, you can always ask, "What's the best way to get to?" or "Do you have a map of the metro or bus routes?"
Those are really practical tips. Now, what if someone finds themselves in an emergency situation? Like if they lose their passport or they need medical help, what should they say?
First, stay calm and remember that people are usually understanding in these situations. If you lose your passport, you can say, "I've lost my passport. Can you help me?" Or if you need medical assistance, you can say, "I need help. Can you call a doctor?" or "Where is the nearest hospital?" In any emergency, using help and please are key words that can get you the assistance you need quickly.
Yeah, emergencies are always stressful. But knowing even just a few essential phrases can help you stay safe and get the help you need. Let's switch gears for a moment and talk about shopping. When you're traveling, whether you're in a market or a store, there are often cultural differences in how people shop. What are some useful phrases for shopping?
Shopping is definitely a big part of the travel experience. If you're browsing, you might say, "How much is this?" or "Can I try this on?" if you're in a clothing store. If you're at a market and you want to negotiate the price, you can ask, "Can you lower the price?" or "Is there a discount?" And always remember to say thank you. It goes a long way in showing respect.
I like that. And what if you're in a situation where you don't understand the price or what the person is saying to you? What's a good phrase for asking for clarification?
That happens all the time. A polite way to ask for clarification is, "Can you repeat that, please?" or "I didn't understand. Can you explain it again?" If you're in a country where people don't speak English fluently, you can also ask, "Do you speak English?" It's always good to approach these moments with patience.
That's great advice. Being patient and polite can make a big difference in how people respond to you. So, before we finish, David, let's quickly summarize the key travel phrases we've talked about today.
Sure. Here's a quick rundown for our listeners. "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to?" for asking directions. "Can I check in, please, at hotels?" "I'd like to order, please." For ordering at a restaurant. "Which bus or train goes to?" for transportation. "Can you help me?" for emergencies. "How much is this?" for shopping. And of course, don't forget to say please and thank you.
Perfect. Those are fantastic phrases to remember when you're traveling. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and knowledge with us today. David, I'm sure our listeners feel a lot more confident about traveling now. Before we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with a few more bonus tips for communicating in English while traveling. One thing that can really help is learning some small talk or social phrases. These aren't just useful for breaking the ice with other travelers, but they can also help when you're interacting with locals. For example, if you're at a cafe or restaurant, you can say something like, "The weather is great today, isn't it?" Or "Have you been here before?" It's a great way to practice your English and get comfortable talking in different situations.
That's a good point, Justin. I've had some of my best travel experiences just by striking up a conversation with a local or a fellow traveler. Even simple phrases like, "Where are you from?" or "Are you here on vacation?" can lead to some really interesting conversations.
Definitely. It's a fun way to connect with people. And speaking of connecting, it's also important to know how to ask for help politely when you're in new places. For instance, if you're lost, asking something like, "Excuse me, can you help me find?" is always better than just saying, "Where is?" Adding "please" and "excuse me" shows respect and makes the interaction smoother.
Exactly. You'll be surprised how much people appreciate it when you use polite phrases. It also helps build your confidence, which is super important when you're speaking English as a second language.
Couldn't agree more. Building confidence while traveling is key. And let's not forget about cultural differences. Different countries have different customs, and it's helpful to be aware of them when you're interacting in English. For example, in some places, it's common to greet people with a handshake, while in others, a simple smile and nod will do.
Yes. And if you're not sure about local customs, it's always okay to ask. You can say, "What's the usual way to greet people here?" Or, "Is it okay if I do this?" People usually appreciate that you're interested in their culture.
Those are fantastic tips, David. And that reminds me of one last important thing. When you're traveling, don't be afraid to use technology to help with communication. If you're unsure about how to say something, you can use translation apps or even show a picture of what you need. Just be flexible and ready to adapt.
Absolutely. I've used translation apps many times, especially in places where English isn't spoken much. They can be a lifesaver, but they also give you the chance to learn some new words and phrases on the spot.
Great advice. Well, I think we've covered a lot of helpful tips today for anyone planning to travel and communicate in English. I hope all of you listening feel more prepared for your next adventure.
Yeah, and don't forget, traveling is all about the experience, so enjoy it, even if you make a few mistakes along the way. That's how we all learn.
Exactly. So, to all our listeners, if you're getting ready to pack your bags and head off on an adventure, remember these tips, stay confident, and most of all, have fun. Thanks again for joining us today, David. I'm sure our listeners got some fantastic insights from your experiences.
Thanks for having me, Justin. It's been a blast talking about one of my favorite topics.
And to everyone out there, thanks for listening to English with Justin. Don't forget to subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful. You can also find more tips and lessons on our YouTube channel. To keep improving your English wherever you are in the world. Until next time, safe travels, and keep practicing your English.